Hey everybody, welcome to episode 78 of the Askdap show, where we answer your Volkswagen Audi questions. On this episode, we talk about metal in your engine after a blown turbo and Mark 7 engine overheating.
Ian Wilkinson via email just purchased a 2001 Jetta Wolfsburg with about 170,000 miles. He has concerns about some noises that the car is making and some potential sludge issues. He wants to know if he's taking the right steps to ensure there isn't any issues.
Okay, Ian, so you have a Mark 4 180 and you have an issue, obviously getting that car, bent valves. That's a lot of times those vehicles get acquired because of lack of maintenance, timing belt stuff. It ends up popping the timing belt and then it bends all the valves, and those cars end up becoming cheap on the market because of that. Obviously you went through the road of replacing the bent valves, all that stuff, timing belt makes sense. Next you go down the road of having noise coming from the timing chain tensioner. For anybody who's not familiar, there is a tensioner that goes between the two camshafts. That is chain driven and then hydraulically adjusts via oil pressure for adjusting the cam timing. So what you're describing sounds like it's noise related to that. Now there's a couple things that I want to touch on in regards to this. Let's start with the top end stuff. Cam chain adjusters obviously can make noise oftentimes when they're failing. So obviously replacing that's not a bad idea. There are a lot of cheapo aftermarket ones out there. They pretty much flooded the market because the factory ones were so absurdly expensive. They're $500, $600, $700 for a replacement one from the factory. So the Chinese market just flooded with $100, $150 cam chain tensioners. The quality, I think, is just in general pretty questionable. So if you're replacing it with one of those, the problem with cheap parts like that is it always leaves you with a question mark. If something like this happens, there's still a big question mark in your head is, could it be the part or is there something actually else going on? So that's a big question mark that I have that I would say is still going to be there if you replace it with one of those cheap ones. If you went with a factory one and you ponied up the money, then you know for sure it's not going to be that and you can move on to something else. Moving on from that. You pulled the pan and checked the pickup. That's a great place to start. Checking the oil pump pickup for any clogs because that chain tensioner is oil pressure driven. Any clog in that oil pump pickup could potentially cause oil pressure issues, and that would obviously transfer up to not being sufficient oil in the head. Good step. Obviously clearing it's important, and sludging on 180s is a really common problem, so making sure you don't have sludging is a good idea. When you pull the valve cover, when they did the head, they should have been able to determine if there was sludging. If they didn't check it at the time or weren't paying attention to it or maybe didn't mention it, that's tough to say. Here's where I would go from here. First, engine sludging. VW had a specific procedure for engine sludging, which included a specific product made by a company called BG that was an engine flush. And BG makes a couple products related to oil. They make quality products, but they make this thing called MOA, which is a oil dump-in can that you do in between oil changes. That is not the engine flush that we're talking about. While that is a good product, what this was a, I want to say it was like maybe a gallon that you would pour into the engine and run it for X period of time, and then change the oil out and completely flush this stuff out of the system. It was to clean up vehicles that had engine sludging issues, and it was recommended by VW as their official repair as part of the fixing engine sludging issue around 180s. So I'll see if I can find that specific product. It's generally not available for retail online. BG products are not intended for retail, they're intended for shops, so you may have to contact your local dealer to see if they offer BG products to see if you can purchase that. Aside from that, the next step I would take is if you've determined you don't have oil sludging, I would start by checking the oil pressure to determine if you maybe have an oil pressure problem and you just have a bad oil pump. That would obviously create that issue, and maybe if it's pumping enough pressure but not quite enough, that would solve that problem. So I'll put a link to 180 oil pumps in the description, as well as that VG engine flush. That would be the path I would go down to check and determine if you have any issues surrounding that specific problem.
Neil Porter via YouTube says, excellent work. What would it take for a Haldex system to put more than 50% rearward?
Okay, so this question was asked on a recent video I put out about how Haldex works. And one addendum I wanted to make, actually, during that video I mentioned that the early gen Haldex system had a mechanical spline pump. I don't know, I had got confused when I was reading some specific material on Gen 1 stuff, and they do not have mechanical actually spline drive. They actually have an electronic pump, which was just an earlier revision to the later one. So that was just a quick note on that. But then there was a bunch of questions on that video that talked about Haldex and tuning them. There are a bunch of different options for tuning Haldex cars. As far as I know, none of them put more than 50% power to the rear. I don't know specifics about that. I would have to dig a little deeper to determine if that's possible. I don't think it is. I think that max you're going to get 50% to the rear just because of the basic gearing of how they're set up. But again, that's just my initial thoughts based on that information on how they're set up. But what you can do, and this is a million people ask questions like this, is can you make it full-time all-wheel drive, or can you do make it adjustable or variable to make sure you have engagement of all-wheel drive all the time? There are Haldex controllers from various people. We would be able to offer the Newspeed ones, which I'll link to all the Newspeed ones in the description below as well. They do not have any for Gen 5, which would be MK7 Golf R and all the MQB platform cars. They do have Haldex controllers for, I believe, all the previous versions. I know they have Gen 4, and they also are going to have one for the Mark IV R, which would, I believe, have Gen 2 Haldex in it. But they do have Haldex controllers, and they give you more ability. I know there's some people who use some systems to basically just hack the system to run full power to one of the signal wires. I've heard of people mentioning that. I don't know if that's a legitimate viable option to basically just engage 100% of the time. I would be concerned, obviously, because Haldex is not intended to be used that way, that engaging it 100% of the time could have some longevity implications around that. And the same thing, even for maybe Haldex controllers, might sacrifice some longevity for the performance aspect that you gain from that. So there are some options out there, and I suspect that even Gen 5, and if there is ever a future Gen 5 system that comes out, I'll also link that in the description, but at this time there aren't any Gen 5 Haldex controllers that are out there.
Carl via email says, so when I removed my turbo, I found a lot of shavings in the turbo elbow and one speck of metal. The shavings, I believe, were when the compressor wheel broke and was spinning on the housing, scarring the housing and leaving the shavings. Furthermore, when I took the pipes off my intercooler, I would say about half a cup of oil drained out of each side, but no sign of metallic particles that I could see. Nevertheless, this leads me to the question. My thoughts are, if any pieces of the turbo did break off, they'd be in the intercooler. It's been making me think that I should replace it. What do you think? To be honest, this project already has me in debt, but I need to get the car running. If you think replacing the intercooler could potentially save my motor, please speak up.
All right, so this message from Carl. Carl's a good customer of ours, and he has his turbo blew on his Mark 7, and so he had purchased some stuff from us to help him repair that, and then he asked this question to me, and I thought this was a kind of a cool thing to share with everybody. Just had a few points to touch on that could be helpful. First thing, he reached out to me, basically was asking me, his turbo failed, and when these turbos fail on Mark 7s, a lot of times the compressor and the turbine wheel actually end up coming apart, and what will happen is, because they spin so fast, 50, 60, 70,000 RPM, when they do come apart, they're spinning so fast that it just wobbles all over the place, and it will eat up the inside housing of the turbo, which obviously creates a lot of metal shavings. A lot of times the turbine wheel will actually fall down the exhaust and either get stuck in the cat, or potentially, for people who run catless, they'll make it all the way down, potentially out of the exhaust or stuck in a muffler or something like that. So, but his turbo failed. He had some metal shavings. He was concerned about that, and then also asked about oil in the charge pipes. His also other concern was that any metal that might have been sent on the outlet of the turbo, the pressure side coming out, might get stuck in his intercooler, or asking if it would be stuck in his intercooler, and should he replace his intercooler if that is the case. So yes, that's a possibility that you could have metal come out of your turbo and get stuck in the intercooler if there was any larger pieces. Small pieces you're probably never going to catch that, and might never ever be significant enough to be there. But if they were to be caught, it would likely be in the intercooler. What I recommended to him is, I don't really see a need to replace the intercooler. I think that's completely unnecessary. If you are concerned about that being an issue, and this is what I recommended to him, what I do is either remove the intercooler or just back flush it. If you back flush it, they would obviously send anything that's in there out of it and prevent any metal shavings that were in there from coming into the engine if that was a significant concern of yours. That would definitely prevent you from having to replace the intercooler, because they're expensive, especially for a performance one, which I think he might have. And so, you know, $600, $700, $800 for a performance intercooler is unnecessary, especially just due to this issue where you can back flush it and solve that problem. Next couple issues, oil in the charge pipes. Oil is pretty normal. Most turbo cars will put out some oil in the boost pipes. It depends on seepage and stuff like that. Especially if you have a failure, it's more likely to have obviously leaking oil into those pipes. It was pretty normal, especially for 1.8Ts, to pull off a charge pipe and have a bunch of oil dump out. You know, as long as it's not majorly excessive. Generally, if you have a turbo that's failed enough to create a big problem there, it's gonna be just blowing smoke out the back anyway, so you would know because you have a big oil burning problem. So I probably wouldn't worry much about that. And then in regards to metal shavings in the inlet side, you're probably better off just cleaning that stuff out. You're not, on the inlet side of stuff, you're probably not gonna have too much to worry about, because that wouldn't have been sent through anywhere per se. Obviously anything's possible, but you're not going to be able to stop that. So just clean it out to the best of your ability, and then again, back flush that intercooler. That should have caught most of that stuff, and that should help you solve your problem. Again, Carl, thank you so much for all your purchases, and hopefully this information helps you and anybody else in this situation.
King Jaff via YouTube says, my dealership installed an APR Stage 1 software on a 2-year-old CPO Mark V GTI. They said it, as long as it was serviced there, they would honor the remaining factory warranty plus the CPO warranty. I think the law puts the onus of proof on the manufacturer or dealer to prove that the modded part voids the warranty. At least that used to be the case.
So this comment was left on a video I recently shot about APR Plus, just kind of explaining some of my concerns around it and kind of just breaking down exactly what the product was. And this was talking about APR, dealer flash APR on their car, and they said that they had nothing to be concerned about. I think I've touched on this before, but I'm not really sure. But I try to touch on this every now and again because I feel like it's super important, and a lot of people have misconceptions about all this stuff. So I want to make sure that everybody is super clear. When a dealer flashes your car, they cannot guarantee that your warranty is intact. They can obviously, generally you're not going to have problems. If a dealer is flashing your car, the biggest concern that there always was with flashing cars was that if a non-dealer flashed your car and you brought it to a dealer, that they would give you a hard time over every single thing. So for example, you flashed your car, and so common problem on TSI engines was intake manifold failures. If your intake manifold fails, they won't warranty that because you have a tune. That was stuff that happens at some dealers, and the idea is that the dealers that tune cars don't do that, and that's generally going to be the case. Any dealer that tunes cars is not going to give you any issues around warranty replacements under stuff that's common problems or stuff like that. This is where stuff comes into play. For this specific issue, I want to talk about a couple things. You talk about the onus being on the dealer for problems. That's a common misconception because people talk about Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. That was actually a law that was passed to prevent dealers from voiding warranties for using non-OEM replacement parts. So you use a non-factory oil filter or a non-factory crank sensor or something of that nature, oxygen sensor, spark plugs, whatever. Anything that met the same standards and specs for a replacement part, they couldn't then void your warranty for not servicing with them. That does not include modifying your car. Under no circumstances does that include modifying your car. I shot a long video about this with a lemon law lawyer who actually does a lot of Magnus and Moss stuff. His name is Steve Leto. I will link to that video here. It's very long, but I wanted to make sure that we got a lot of detail in about that subject. So for a lot of people, it doesn't have a lot of views. People don't generally tend to like it and share it because two things, it talks about a subject that they don't necessarily want to be true, and two, it's just really detailed, and unless you're kind of a nerd about that stuff, you're probably not going to be super interested in it. But I would urge anybody who's interested in this subject to watch that video and learn more about the specifics of that stuff. And then the next thing I want to touch on with this was CPO. If you have a CPO car that's tuned, the likelihood of them having any warranty issues around a CPO, certified pre-owned warranty, is very unlikely. There's almost no circumstance that I'm aware of, at least at this time, that I've heard of, where a CPO warranty has any relation to TD1 flagging. That may be different in the future, but as far as I know at this point, that shouldn't be an issue. So your CPO warranty should still be intact because it's kind of a different process from you, the customer's perspective. It's kind of the same thing. From a logistics dealer perspective, it's different. And so that warranty is generally not going to be affected by TD1 as far as I know at this point, which is why that part makes it a little bit easier. But anybody who has a tuned car by a dealer, there are circumstances where they may not be able to protect you. And unless you have something in writing guaranteeing that they're covering anything not covered by VW, then you don't have a guarantee on a warranty. So that would just be something that I just want everybody to be aware of about that subject.
Anthony Hodges via email. I'm looking for some modification advice for my Golf R Mark 7 2015. Basically, I'm thinking my car is running slightly hot, sometimes reaching 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Sorry, I'm converting from Celsius here. On long drives, and occasionally reaching 245 degrees Fahrenheit after about 4 laps at a track before I back off the speed to cool it down. I'm concerned that this is slightly more than what had been normal. It is summer here, so we do get the odd warm or humid day, and I'm sure that this is a factor. Are there simple fixes or mods that you recommend that I can make that would help?
Okay, Anthony, you track your Mark 7R and you are looking for ways to cool it down. So I'm not sure, the one thing about this is, I'm not sure if you're talking about oil temps or coolant temps, but I'm just gonna assume it's either or both, and we'll kind of tackle both of them. This temperature, while it might be a little bit high, it sounds kind of in line. The one thing I think a lot of people get used to, especially with most vehicles, and I think I talked about this in the past, was that temperature gauge. I think it stays at 220, constantly staying in the middle. But if you actually get an actual gauge on the car, it fluctuates a lot. So vehicles have done this for a while now, or at least Volkswagen and Audi has, where they stick that gauge in the middle unless the car is overheating, at which point it will raise that gauge up. But cars naturally raise and lower their temperature. That's just a normal operation of how they work. And so that's going to be something that will happen. And if you're tracking the car, obviously it's going to be hotter. The Mark 7R already has an auxiliary radiator, an additional radiator. So you already have kind of an additional cooling on that vehicle. So if you were to look to add cooling in that system, you'd probably have to go with a custom radiator to increase the cooling capacity of that. That would be an option, but as far as I know, there aren't any turnkey ones at this point, and you can look down the road of maybe some custom ones. If we're talking about oil temperature, I know people have talked about oil pressure on Mark 7s being, or oil temperature on Mark 7s being a little high. Again, I think I talked about this fairly recently about oil coolers on Mark 7s. I'm not aware of any that exist, but if you're tracking your car, an oil cooler isn't a bad idea and could be an option for you in the future. That would have to be something custom at this point because I'm not aware of any that actually exist. But I'm sure at some point they will exist. It just depends on cost benefit. I mean, an oil cooler, my guess for a quality oil cooler whole unit is probably going to be $600-700 for whenever they actually do get made, because the only people who are going to make them are going to be kind of those top tier manufacturers who make those different and kind of niche parts that not a lot of people are going to be purchasing, because oil coolers are something that is kind of a unique specific thing that most people aren't going to want and or need unless they're tracking their car. So hopefully that helps you, and I think you're going to be okay, but if you continue to plan to track your car, you might want to look down the road of some of those options I talked about. Thank you so much for watching episode 78 of the Askdap Show, where we answer your Volkswagen Audi questions. If you have any questions or comments about the questions answered in this show, be sure to leave in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.